Marcus Chen had owned a corner convenience store on Maple Street for 17 years. It wasn't much to look at from the outside: faded awnings, flickering neon signs, and windows covered with advertisements for lottery tickets and energy drinks. But to Marcus, it was everything. This store had put his daughter through college, helped him care for his aging mother, and given him a sense of purpose every single day. Tonight, like every Tuesday night, he stood behind the counter organizing receipts while the rain hammered against the windows outside. The clock on the wall read 9:45. 15 minutes until closing time. Marcus glanced around his empty store, listening to the rhythm of the rain and the gentle hum of the refrigerators lining the back wall. Tuesday nights were always slow, especially when the weather turned ugly like this. He had made maybe $200 all evening, barely enough to cover the day's expenses. But Marcus never complained. Hard work had been his philosophy since immigrating to this country 30 years ago, and he wasn't about to change now. The bell above the door chimed, breaking his concentration. Marcus looked up and felt his breath catch slightly. The man who walked in was impossible not to recognize, even wearing a simple black jacket and jeans. Jason Statham moved through the door with a kind of presence that seemed to change the air pressure in the room. Marcus had seen enough action movies to know that walk, that intense gaze, that coiled energy that suggested danger and protection in equal measure. Statham nodded politely at Marcus and headed straight for the coffee machine in the corner. He moved with purpose, pouring himself a large cup of the store's mediocre brew without seeming to care about its quality. Marcus wanted to say something, to acknowledge that he recognized a famous actor, but something stopped him. Maybe it was a tired look in Statham's eyes, or the way he seemed to want nothing more than a moment of peace. So Marcus stayed quiet, respecting the unspoken boundary between celebrity and civilian. Outside, the rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning briefly illuminated the empty parking lot. Statham stood by the window, sipping his coffee and staring out into the storm. There was something contemplative about his posture, as if he carried weights that had nothing to do with physical strength. Marcus understood that feeling. Everyone had their burdens, their private struggles that the world never saw. 3 more customers trickled in over the next few minutes. An elderly woman buying cat food moved slowly through the aisles, muttering to herself about the weather. A young couple holding hands grabbed snacks and sodas, laughing quietly about some private joke. A businessman in a rumpled suit purchased cigarettes and a sandwich, barely making eye contact as he paid. Normal people living normal lives, seeking shelter from the rain and whatever else troubled them. Marcus felt content in these moments. His store might not be glamorous, but it served a purpose. It was a safe harbor in the storm, a place where people could find what they needed at any hour. He took pride in keeping his shelves stocked, his floors clean, and his prices fair. His father had taught him that honest work had dignity, regardless of how humble it might appear. Statham had moved to the magazine rack near the front, casually flipping through an automotive publication. The elderly woman shuffled to the counter to pay, and Marcus rang up a purchase with a warm smile. As he handed her the change, he noticed something through the rain-streaked window that made his stomach tighten. A black van had pulled into the parking lot, its headlights off despite the darkness. It sat there idling, ominous and wrong in a way Marcus couldn't quite articulate. The woman left, struggling with her umbrella. The young couple wandered toward the counter with their arms full of junk food. The businessman had already gone. And still that van sat outside, its engine running, its windows too dark to see through. Marcus felt a cold sensation creeping up his spine. In 17 years, he had never been robbed, but he had heard the stories from other store owners. He had seen the fear in their eyes when they recounted the experience. Something was about to happen. Marcus could feel it in his bones. He glanced at Statham, still absorbed in his magazine, and then back at the van. The clock ticked toward closing time, and the rain continued to fall, washing away the ordinary evening and replacing it with something else entirely. The black van's doors exploded open at exactly 9:57. 4 men emerged into the rain, their movements synchronized and purposeful. They weren't amateurs stumbling through their first robbery. These were professionals who had clearly done this before, and that made them infinitely more dangerous. Each wore a dark hoodie pulled low over their faces, and Marcus caught the glint of metal as they approached the door. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might break through. The leader, a massive man with shoulders like a linebacker, reached the door first. He didn't hesitate, didn't scout the interior. He simply yanked it open and stormed inside, a sawed-off shotgun appearing in his hands like some nightmare made real. The bell that had chimed so pleasantly all evening now sounded like a death knell. Behind him came the others, spreading out with military precision. One carried a handgun, another brandished a knife that caught the fluorescent lights, and the fourth held a crowbar that had clearly seen violence before. The young couple screamed. The woman dropped her armful of snacks, sending candy bars and chip bags scattering across the floor. Her boyfriend pulled her behind him instinctively, a futile gesture of protection that would mean nothing against what they faced. They backed toward the refrigerators, terror written across their faces in bold letters. Marcus felt his legs go weak. This was it, the moment every small business owner dreaded but never truly believed would come. His hand drifted toward the silent alarm button beneath the counter, but the leader's voice stopped him cold. "Don't even think about it, old man." The words came out harsh and certain. The shotgun swung toward Marcus with casual menace. "Hands where I can see them. Now!" Marcus raised his trembling hands slowly. 17 years of peaceful business, 17 years of serving his community, and now this. He thought of his daughter, safely away at a medical residency in another state. At least she was far from here. At least she wouldn't see this. The thought provided cold comfort. "Everyone stay calm, and nobody gets hurt," the leader announced, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care either way. His eyes scanned the store, counting victims, assessing threats. The young couple, the old shopkeeper, and then his gaze landed on the man standing near the magazine rack, still holding his coffee cup, seemingly unbothered by the chaos that had just erupted. For a moment, the leader seemed confused. Statham hadn't moved, hadn't reacted with the expected fear and panic. He simply stood there, his expression neutral, his posture relaxed. To anyone else, it might have looked like shock or denial, but something in his eyes suggested otherwise. They held a calculating coldness that Marcus recognized from countless movie scenes, except now it was real and far more terrifying. "You," the leader barked at Statham. "On the ground, face down, hand behind your head." Statham took a slow sip of his coffee. The gesture was so casual, so deliberately provocative, that everyone in the store seemed to hold their breath. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You should leave. Right now, while you still can." The second robber, the one with the handgun, laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound that held no humor. "Tough guy, huh? You think you're in one of your movies." He moved closer, his weapon pointed at Statham's chest. "This is real life, hero. Get on the ground before I put you there permanently." Marcus wanted to shout a warning, wanted to tell them who they were threatening, but the words stuck in his throat. Part of him wondered if knowing would even matter. These men had come here expecting an easy score, quick cash from a defenseless store owner. They hadn't expected resistance, and certainly not from a customer who seemed more annoyed than afraid. The leader's patience evaporated. He gestured to the man with the crowbar. "Make him comply. Break his legs if you have to." That's when everything changed. The man with the crowbar stepped forward, raising his weapon overhead for a brutal downward strike. It was a move meant to intimidate, to demonstrate dominance through overwhelming force. But he never completed it. Statham moved with speed that seemed impossible for someone his age, someone who made his living pretending to fight. The coffee cup dropped, splashing dark liquid across the floor. Statham's hand shot out, catching the crowbar mid-swing with a grip that stopped it dead. The robber's eyes widened in shock. He tried to pull the crowbar free, but it might as well have been encased in concrete. Statham twisted, using the man's own momentum against him, and suddenly the robber was airborne. He crashed into a display of potato chips with enough force to shake the entire shelf. Bags exploded, sending a cloud of processed food fragments into the air like confetti at the world's worst party. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The other three robbers stood frozen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Marcus felt his fear transform into something else, something closer to hope. And the young couple stopped crying, their terror replaced by confused amazement. The leader recovered first, his face flushing red with rage. He pumped the shotgun, the mechanical sound harsh and final in the small space. "Big mistake. Tough guy. Biggest mistake of your life. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Marcus realized he was about to witness murder in his own store. The night had gone from ordinary to nightmare in the span of 3 minutes, and now it threatened to end in blood and death. The shotgun blast never came. Statham moved before the leader could complete his trigger pull, diving sideways behind a display of motor oil and antifreeze. The shot exploded anyway, a deafening roar that shattered the front window and sent glass spraying across the parking lot. The muzzle flash lit up the store like lightning, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Marcus dropped behind his counter instinctively, his ears ringing so badly he could barely hear his own panicked breathing. The young couple had pressed themselves flat against the refrigerators, their bodies shaking with terror. The woman was sobbing now, her face buried in her boyfriend's chest while he tried to shield her with his body. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the kid's bravery, pointless as it might prove to be. Love made people do courageous things, even when courage meant nothing against overwhelming violence. Spread out, the leader screamed at his crew. Find him. He's just one man. But Statham wasn't just one man. He was a trained martial artist, a student of Wing Chun, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and kickboxing who had spent decades preparing for roles that required real physical skill. More than that, he had worked with military advisors, former Special Forces operators who had taught him not just how to look dangerous on camera, but how to actually survive violent encounters. The line between performance and reality had blurred for him years ago, and these criminals were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The robber with a knife moved down the center aisle, his weapon held low and ready. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-20s, with nervous energy that made him twitchy and unpredictable. Marcus could see him scanning the shelves, looking for any sign of movement. He passed the bread section, then the canned goods, his breathing loud and ragged in the sudden quiet. Statham waited until the man was exactly where he needed him to be. Then he rose from behind a different display, moving with the silence of a predator. His hand shot out, grabbing the knife wielder's wrist and twisting it with practiced precision. There was a sickening crack, followed by a scream. The knife clattered to the floor, and Statham swept the man's legs out from under him. The robber went down hard, his head bouncing off the linoleum with a sound that made Marcus wince. 2 down, 2 to go. The leader and the gunman had split up, trying to flank Statham's last known position. They moved more carefully now, their earlier confidence replaced by something closer to fear. They had come here expecting sheep, but they had found a wolf instead. The dynamic had shifted completely, and they knew it. The hunter had become the hunted. Marcus lifted his head just enough to peer over the counter. He could see Statham moving between the aisles, using the shelves as cover and concealment. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work. This wasn't the choreographed fighting of movies, where punches landed with perfect timing and bodies flew through the air in defiance of physics. This was brutal, efficient, and terrifyingly real. Every movement had purpose. Every action served survival. The gunman appeared at the end of aisle 3, his weapon sweeping left and right as he searched for a target. His hands were shaking badly enough that Marcus could see it from across the store. Good, he thought. Let them be afraid. Let them feel what they made others feel. The gunman took a step forward, then another, moving deeper into the maze of products and possibilities. Statham dropped down from on top of the shelving unit, landing behind the gunman with cat-like grace. Before the man could turn, Statham's arm wrapped around his throat in a perfect rear-naked choke. The gunman tried to raise his weapon, tried to fire, but his strength was already fading. Statham held the pressure with practiced ease, and within seconds, the robber went limp. Statham lowered him to the ground almost gently, making sure he was unconscious but breathing. Then he picked up the fallen handgun and ejected the magazine, sending it skittering across the floor in one direction while he tossed the empty weapon in another. 3 down, 1 to go. The leader stood at the far end of the store, his shotgun raised but trembling slightly. He had watched his entire crew get dismantled in less than 5 minutes. The confidence he'd walked in with had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning realization that he was trapped in a building with someone far more dangerous than himself. His eyes darted toward the broken window, calculating whether he could make it outside before getting stopped. Don't, Statham said quietly, stepping into view. There was no bravado in his voice, no movie star heroism, just a simple statement of fact. You won't make it. The leader's face contorted with rage and desperation. He was cornered, and cornered animals did unpredictable things. "Stay back. I'll do it. I'll shoot everyone in here." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. He believed the threat. The leader had nothing left to lose now, and that made him infinitely more dangerous than when he'd first walked through that door. The young couple must have sensed it too, because their sobbing intensified. The woman was hyperventilating, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that suggested she was on the edge of panic. Statham raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed, but his eyes never left the leader's face, never stopped calculating distances and angles. "You don't want to do that. Murder changes everything. Right now, you're looking at robbery charges. You fire that weapon at an innocent person, and you're looking at life without parole. Maybe the death penalty, depending on the prosecutor." "You think I care?" The leader shouted, but his voice cracked. He did care. Underneath the bravado and the violence, he was just a man who had made terrible choices and was now facing consequences he hadn't anticipated. "Your crew is alive," Statham continued, his voice steady and calm. "They'll need medical attention, but they'll live. You can still walk away from this. Not free, but alive. You can still have a future, even if it's behind bars." The shotgun wavered. For a moment, Marcus thought the leader might actually lower it, might actually make the smart choice and surrender. But then his face hardened, and Marcus saw the decision made in his eyes. The leader's finger tightened on the trigger, and time seemed to slow down to a crawl. Marcus could see every detail with crystalline clarity, the sweat running down the man's face, the way his jaw clenched with desperate determination, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of adrenaline and fear mixing into something volatile and unpredictable. The shotgun barrel swung away from Statham and toward the young couple huddled against the refrigerators. They were easier targets, defenseless victims who couldn't fight back. The woman saw death coming for her. Her eyes went wide, and she opened her mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. Her boyfriend pulled her tighter against him, turning his back toward the weapon as if his body could somehow stop the buckshot that was about to tear through them both. It was a gesture born of love and futility in equal measure. But Statham had already moved. He launched himself forward with explosive power, covering the 15 feet between himself and the leader in less than 2 seconds. His shoulder hit the man's midsection just as the shotgun discharged, and the blast went high and wide, punching a hole through the ceiling tiles and sending a rain of dust and debris cascading down. The two men crashed into the magazine rack, sending publications flying through the air like confused birds. They hit the ground hard, grappling for control of the weapon. The leader was bigger, heavier, with a strength that came from a lifetime of manual labor and violence. But Statham had technique, training that had been drilled into him by some of the best fighters in the world. He used leverage and precision where the leader used brute force, and gradually, inevitably, he began to win. Marcus couldn't just hide anymore. He reached under the counter with shaking hands and found the aluminum baseball bat he kept for protection, but had never imagined actually using. It felt impossibly light and impossibly heavy at the same time. He stood up, gripping the bat so tightly his knuckles turned white, and moved around the counter toward the struggling men. The leader managed to get one hand free and drove his fist into Statham's face. It was a solid hit, the kind that would have dropped most men immediately. Blood exploded from Statham's nose, and Marcus heard the sickening crunch of cartilage breaking. But Statham barely seemed to notice. He headbutted the leader in return, their skulls connecting with a sound like two rocks being smashed together. The shotgun skittered across the floor, kicked away in the chaos. It came to rest near the candy aisle, just a few feet from where the young couple stood frozen. The boyfriend looked at it, then at his girlfriend, then at Marcus. The question in his eyes was clear. Should he try to grab it? Should he help? Marcus shook his head sharply. The kid wasn't trained for this. He would only get himself hurt. Statham got his arm around the leader's throat again, that same chokehold he had used on the gunman earlier. But this time, the leader was ready for it. He threw himself backward, slamming Statham into the floor with all his considerable weight. The impact drove the air from Statham's lungs in an explosive gasp, and his grip loosened just enough for the leader to slip free. They rolled away from each other, both breathing hard, both bleeding. The leader's face was a mask of blood from a cut above his eye, and Statham's nose continued to stream red down his chin and neck. They climbed to their feet slowly, circling each other like exhausted prize fighters in the final round of a brutal match. "This is insane," the leader panted. "It's just money. It's not worth dying for." "Tell that to the people you were about to kill," Statham replied, his voice thick and nasal from his broken nose. "Tell that to the shopkeeper who worked his whole life to build something, or those kids who just wanted some snacks and a normal night." The leader's eyes flicked toward the broken window, toward freedom and escape. Marcus could see him weighing his options, calculating whether he could make it out before Statham caught him. The rain still fell outside, washing away evidence, providing cover. It was tempting. Marcus could see the temptation written across the man's face. Then sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily louder. Someone must have called the police when they heard the gunshots. Help was coming. But it was still minutes away, and minutes could be a lifetime when violence hung in the balance. The leader made his decision. He lunged for the shotgun, diving across the floor with his hand outstretched. His fingers touched the wooden stock, began to close around it. But Marcus moved too, driven by courage he didn't know he possessed. The baseball bat swung down in a clean arc, connecting with the leader's hand with a crack that echoed through the store. The leader screamed and rolled away, cradling his injured hand against his chest. Marcus stood over the shotgun now, his bat raised and ready. His whole body shook with fear and adrenaline, but he didn't back down. This was his store. These were his customers, and he would protect them with whatever strength he could muster. Statham crossed the distance in 3 long strides and planted his foot on the shotgun, pinning it to the floor. Then he grabbed the leader by his hoodie and hauled him upright. For a moment, they stood face to face, predator and prey, winner and loser. The leader's eyes held defeat and something else, maybe respect, maybe just exhaustion. "It's over," Statham said quietly. "Stay down." The leader slumped to his knees, all the fight draining out of him. His crew lay scattered around the store, groaning and unconscious and bleeding. The robbery that was supposed to take 5 minutes had turned into a disaster that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The sirens grew louder, closer, bringing justice and consequences in equal measure. Marcus lowered his bat with trembling hands. The young couple emerged from their hiding place, clinging to each other but alive and unharmed. The store was a disaster, broken glass, scattered products, blood on the floor, but everyone who mattered was still breathing. That was what counted. That was everything. The police arrived in a storm of flashing lights and organized chaos. 4 patrol cars screamed into the parking lot, followed closely by an ambulance and 2 more units. Officers poured through the broken window and the front door with weapons drawn, shouting commands and securing the scene. Marcus raised his hands immediately, and the young couple did the same. Only Statham remained calm, slowly pulling out his identification and explaining the situation in clear, concise terms that suggested he had done this before. The lead officer was a veteran named Detective Saracen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname. She took one look at the scene. 4 injured suspects, a destroyed store, and a famous action star standing in the middle of it all, and her expression shifted from professional alertness to genuine disbelief. She had seen a lot in 20 years on the force, but this was something new. The paramedics went to work immediately, checking the injured robbers and loading them onto stretchers. The one with a broken wrist was conscious and cursing, spitting threats that no one took seriously anymore. The one who had hit his head was concussed but stable. The one Statham had choked out was already awake, sitting against a shelf with his hands cuffed behind his back, looking stunned and confused. The leader was the worst off, with several broken fingers and facial injuries that would require surgery to properly repair. Detective Chen approached Marcus first, her notepad out and ready. "Mr. Chen, I need you to walk me through what happened here, from the beginning." Marcus told her everything, his voice shaking at first but growing stronger as he spoke. He described the quiet evening, the ordinary customers, the black van that had set off his instincts. He talked about the moment the robbers burst through the door, the terror he had felt, the certainty that he was going to die in his own store. And then he described what Statham had done, how he had moved with precision and purpose, how he had protected everyone without hesitation or ego. Detective Chen listened carefully, occasionally asking questions for clarification. Other officers took statement from the young couple, who could barely speak through their relief and residual fear. The boyfriend kept saying he saved our lives over and over, like a mantra or a prayer. The girlfriend just cried, releasing all the terror she had held inside during those awful minutes. Statham sat on a plastic crate near the coffee machine, holding an ice pack against his broken nose. A paramedic tried to convince him to go to the hospital for proper treatment, but he waved her off. "I've had worse," he said with a slight smile. "I'll be fine." The paramedic looked skeptical but didn't push. You couldn't force treatment on someone who refused it, even if that someone was clearly in pain. When Detective Chen finished with Marcus, she moved over to Statham. Her expression was professional, but Marcus could see the curiosity burning in her eyes. "Mr. Statham, I have to say, this is not how I expected my Tuesday night to go." Statham laughed, then winced as a movement aggravated his nose. "Me neither, Detective. I just wanted coffee." "Walk me through your actions," she said, flipping to a fresh page in a notepad. From the moment the suspects entered the store. Statham's account was remarkably detailed and unemotional. He described his threat assessment, his initial decision to comply, and the moment he realized that compliance wouldn't guarantee anyone's safety. He explained his training, his experience working with fight choreographers and military consultants, and how that knowledge had informed his responses. He was careful to emphasize that he had used the minimum force necessary at each stage, that his goal had been to neutralize threats while minimizing harm. Detective Chen wrote furiously, occasionally shaking her head in amazement. When Statham finished, she looked up at him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "Mr. Statham, under California law, you are absolutely justified in your actions. This is textbook self-defense and defense of others. You're not going to face any charges. In fact, if I'm being honest, you probably saved lives tonight." Relief washed over Marcus so powerfully that his knees almost buckled. He had been worried, irrationally perhaps, that Statham might face legal consequences for protecting them. The system didn't always reward heroism, and sometimes good people got punished for doing the right thing. But not tonight. Tonight, justice seemed to be working the way it was supposed to. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Crime scene technicians photographed everything, documenting the destruction for evidence. Officers collected the weapons, the shotgun, the handgun, the knife, the crowbar, and bagged them carefully. The injured robbers were taken away to the hospital under guard, where they would be treated and then booked on multiple felony charges. Marcus learned that they had hit 3 other stores in the past month, their take totaling over $30,000. They had hurt 2 people in previous robberies, sending one victim to the hospital with a skull fracture. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the last of the police vehicles pulled away. Marcus stood in his ruined store, looking at the damage and trying to process everything that had happened. The insurance would cover most of it, but there would be weeks of repairs, weeks of lost business. Still, he was alive. His customers were alive. That was what mattered. Statham emerged from the back room where he had been washing blood off his face and hands. His nose was grotesquely swollen, and bruises were already forming under both eyes. He would look like hell for his next film appearance, Marcus thought. But he was smiling slightly, and his eyes held a warmth that seemed at odds with the violence he had committed. "I'm sorry about your store," Statham said quietly. "I tried to minimize the damage, but—" Marcus shook his head firmly. "You saved my life. You saved those kids. The store can be repaired. People can't." He extended his hand, and after a moment, Statham shook it. His grip was firm but careful, mindful of Marcus's age and the trauma they had both experienced. "You were brave, too," Statham said. "That moment with the bat, that took real courage. Not everyone would have done that." Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes. He had spent the whole night being terrified, and now that it was over, the emotions were crashing over him like waves. I couldn't let them hurt anyone. This is my store. My responsibility." They stood together in the wreckage, 2 men from completely different worlds brought together by violence and chance. The young couple had left hours ago, driven home by police officers who wanted to make sure they were safe. Marcus was alone except for Statham, and somehow that felt right. "The media is going to have a field day with this," Statham said ruefully. "Action star stops real robbery. They'll probably turn it into a movie pitch." Marcus laughed, surprising himself. The sound felt strange after everything, but also necessary. Will you play yourself? God, I hope not. I've had enough real violence for one lifetime. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the parking lot, Marcus began the long process of cleaning up. Statham stayed to help, refusing to leave until everything was secured. Together, they swept up glass, righted fallen shelves, and tried to restore some sense of order to the chaos. It was simple work, honest work, and it felt healing somehow. By the time Marcus finally locked the door and headed home, the story was already going viral. Cell phone footage from the young couple had hit social media, and news crews were setting up outside the store. But Marcus didn't care about fame or attention. He cared that he was going home to call his daughter, to hear her voice and tell her he loved her. He cared that somewhere in the city, two young people were holding each other tight and thanking God they were alive. He cared that justice had prevailed, even if it came wrapped in violence and pain. And he cared that he had met a genuine hero, someone who didn't hesitate when others needed help. Not because cameras were rolling or fans were watching, but because it was simply the right thing to do. That was what real heroism looked like, not perfect, not pretty, but absolutely necessary. Marcus Chen drove home as the city woke up around him, and for the first time in 17 years, he thought maybe he would take a few days off. He had earned them. They all had.